This morning, President Trump posted on social media, America's in a position of strength, Iran is begging, and you read that and maybe you think, okay, maybe this is finally settling down. I want you to stop and I want you to read a list with me. Iran walked away from the negotiating table in Bergenstock today with oil and petrochemical export sanctions waived. The maritime blockade on Iran lifted. Frozen assets held in Qatar released. A reconstruction and development fund for Iran launched with figures reported at $300 billion and 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% still sitting untouched inside Iranian territory. Not inspected, not diluted, not discussed. America walked away with a calendar appointment 60 days from now. Now, ask yourself, and I want you to actually ask yourself this, not just keep reading, who is begging whom? Al Jazeera is calling it a constructive day. Reuters is calling it encouraging progress. BBC is calling it a diplomatic achievement. Every major news organization on the planet is pointing at the 60-day roadmap and calling it a win for diplomacy. I think they are all missing the point completely. What happened today in Switzerland is not a diplomatic win for America. What happened today is the moment when a country that launched a war to destroy Iran's nuclear program ended up paying Iran $300 billion to keep it at least for 60 more days. And I want to show you exactly why that happened. Why it was almost structurally unavoidable, given the decisions America made over the last 4 months, and what it tells us about where the next 60 days are going. I'm going to start not where you'd expect, not with the war, not with the negotiations, not with the Strait of Hormuz. I'm going to start in Athens. Not Greece today, Athens in 415 BC, because what is happening right now has a name. The ancient Greeks gave it that name 2,400 years ago, and they described its mechanics with a precision that should make every American foreign policy official deeply uncomfortable. Okay, so let me introduce a framework. I want you to remember 4 words because these 4 words are going to organize everything else I say today. The words are hubris, nemesis, and thesis. The ancient Greeks were not just telling stories. They were engineers of human behavior. They were documenting with incredible precision the mechanics by which great powers destroy themselves. And the mechanics they identified 2,400 years ago are playing out in real time right now in 2026. Step 1, hubris. This is not ordinary arrogance. Ordinary arrogance is just thinking you're better than you are. Hubris is something more specific. Hubris is the arrogance of a power that believes it stands above the laws of nature, above the laws of history, above consequence. Hubris is when a civilization looks at the world and says, the normal rules do not apply to us. Step 2, this is the blindness that follows hubris. The Greeks believed that when a person or a nation crossed into hubris, the gods would send a kind of madness, a loss of judgment, the inability to properly assess risk, the refusal to listen to warnings, the certainty even in the face of mounting evidence that you are still winning. Step 3, nemesis. This is the punishment. And here's the crucial thing about nemesis that most people get wrong. Nemesis does not necessarily come from your enemy. Nemesis comes from reality itself. It comes from geography, from economics, from the laws of physics and logistics. Nemesis is the moment when reality stops cooperating with your illusions. Step 4, thesis. This is the collapse, the reckoning, the moment when the bill comes due. Now in 415 BC, Athens was the most powerful city-state in the Mediterranean world, the largest navy, the most sophisticated democracy, the wealthiest treasury, and they made a decision that the historian Thucydides spent his entire life trying to explain to future generations. They decided to send their entire military force, their entire fleet, to conquer the island of Sicily. Why? Strategic necessity? No. Because they were powerful enough to want things without thinking carefully about what happens when those wants run into reality. Thucydides called this pleonexia, the lust for more, the compulsion to expand beyond what is rational or sustainable. What happened? The entire fleet was destroyed. The entire expeditionary army was annihilated. Athens never recovered. 9 years later, they lost the Peloponnesian War entirely. The world's most brilliant democracy, gone. And Thucydides' devastating conclusion was this: Athens was not destroyed by Sparta. Athens was destroyed by its refusal to acknowledge its own limitations. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Good, because on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. The stated objectives: destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure, eliminate its ballistic missile program, trigger regime change, achieve all of this in less than 24 hours. I want you to hear that. Less than 24 hours. For a country of 87 million people, with a military that has been preparing for exactly this kind of attack for 20 years, this is hubris. This is Athens in 415. And just like the Athenians who sailed to Sicily convinced of easy victory, the people designing Operation Epic Fury did not ask the question that Thucydides says you must always ask first. What happens when this goes wrong? All right, here's the thing that makes 2026 uniquely dangerous and the thing that even smart analysts are consistently getting wrong in their coverage. America is not fighting one war. America is fighting 3 wars at the same time. And this is the specific mistake Athens made. They were already fighting Sparta. They were already managing an empire of island states that required constant military reassurance. And then they decided to open a third front in Sicily. Let me walk you through America's 3 fronts right now. Front number 1, Iran. The direct military engagement, Operation Epic Fury, missiles, airstrikes, naval operations in the Persian Gulf. This is a front everyone is watching. Front number 2, China. This is a technology war. The semiconductor export controls, the attempt to cut off China's access to the advanced chips it needs to modernize its military and its AI development. The United States has invested hundreds of billions of dollars in this campaign. And as I'll show you in a moment, it is not working the way they planned. Front number 3, Russia and Ukraine. The United States is still trying to support Ukraine, still trying to prevent a complete Russian victory, and still trying to stop the consolidation of a Russia-China-Iran strategic axis that would fundamentally reorder the global balance of power. 3 fronts, 1 country, finite resources, finite ammunition, finite political will. Now, here's the specific data point I want you to focus on, because this one number tells you everything you need to know about the actual state of American military capacity right now. The acting Secretary of the Navy announced publicly, openly, that the United States is pausing a $14 billion weapons sale to Taiwan. Pausing because the American military does not have enough munitions to fight in Iran and also supply Taiwan at the same time. Okay, guys, sit with that for a moment. The country that spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined, the country with 11 carrier strike groups, the country with the most sophisticated weapon systems in human history. That country had to tell its most important strategic partner in the Pacific, sorry, we can't send you weapons right now. We're running a bit short. This is 8. This is the blindness, a superpower so convinced of its infinite capacity that it committed to 3 separate theaters without running the basic logistics calculation of do we actually have enough ammunition to sustain this? And then the variables started showing up, the ones nobody planned for. Okay, this is a part I find most intellectually interesting because in Greek philosophy, nemesis never comes from where you expect it. Nemesis is the correction that comes from reality itself. And in 2026, reality's correction came from a geography lesson, the Strait of Hormuz. Let me describe this to you physically. At its narrowest point, it is 21 miles wide. 21 miles. And through those 21 miles flows 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas every single day. Not some of it. 1/5 of all global energy supply. Japan is almost entirely dependent on it. South Korea is dependent on it. Germany depends on it. India depends on it. China depends on it. Iran closed it. Now, the United States has the most powerful navy in the history of human civilization. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, nuclear submarines, enough firepower concentrated in the Persian Gulf to sink every ship Iran has ever built twice over. But here's the problem that no amount of firepower solves. You cannot bomb open a strait that is being closed by a country willing to absorb the counterattack and keep firing back. Iran has missiles positioned on the coast. They have drones in the air. They have mines in the water. And here is the economic arithmetic that is slowly bleeding the American military. Every time the United States shoots down one of Iran's attack drones with a Patriot interceptor missile, Iran spends approximately $5,000 and America spends $4 million, Iran is winning economically in every single exchange. And this connects to a military concept I want you to understand because it's the variable that American planners most catastrophically underestimated. Iran calls it mosaic defense. The idea is simple, but the execution is brilliant. Instead of concentrating your military capability in large bases and command centers that your enemy can destroy in a single strike, you disperse, you distribute, you push decision-making down to the lowest possible level. You create thousands of small, cheap, mobile units that can operate completely independently. There is no center. There is no single target that, if destroyed, collapses the system. It's like trying to defeat a swarm. You can kill individual bees indefinitely, but as long as the hive survives in distributed form, the swarm continues. When Epic Fury tried to decapitate Iranian military leadership, the system adapted. It didn't collapse. It restructured around the damage like a biological organism responding to injury. But nemesis didn't only come from Iranian military ingenuity. It came from 4 other directions that Washington didn't anticipate. Variable number 1, the Arab Gulf states said no. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar. These are the countries that American foreign policy has treated as its natural regional partners for 50 years. They refused to allow the United States to use their airspace or their military installations to conduct strikes against Iran. Not because they love Iran, but because they understood that if they opened their territory to American operations, they would immediately become Iran's next legitimate military targets. They made a rational calculation, and they chose self-preservation over alliance loyalty. Variable number 2, Russia and China acting as what I think of as the Sparta-Persia axis. Athens lost the Peloponnesian War not simply because Sparta was stronger. Sparta had been fighting Athens for years without a decisive result. Athens lost when Persia decided to fund Sparta. Persia didn't need to fight. Persia just needed to provide enough resources to keep Sparta in the war. In 2026, China and Russia are playing exactly the same Persia role. China continued buying 80 to 90% of Iran's oil, openly, publicly, defying American sanctions. China provided technology to help Iran evade export controls. There are credible reports of NVIDIA chips, the advanced processors that America specifically banned from export to adversaries, being smuggled to Iran through intermediaries. Russia provided diplomatic cover at the United Nations Security Council, blocking every resolution. Both countries gave Iran the oxygen to keep fighting. Variable number 3, Europe's refusal. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius said publicly in a television interview that the court pushed into the bottleneck of the Strait of Hormuz was pushed there by Donald Trump, not by Europe. Trump publicly criticized and humiliated Giorgia Meloni, the Italian prime minister, who was considered his closest European ally. He attacked Germany, he attacked France, and instead of rallying the alliance, he shattered it. Variable number 4, the emergence of new mediators. This one genuinely surprised me. Pakistan and Qatar are becoming the actual architects of the peace process. The United States has been the central mediator of Middle Eastern diplomacy since at least 1973. Camp David, Oslo, the Abraham Accords, always America at the center. And today the agreement between Iran and the United States was structured by Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and Qatar's Emir. The joint statement came from Pakistan and Qatar. The roadmap was announced by Pakistan and Qatar. The United States signed on to an agenda set by countries it has historically treated as secondary players. This is nemesis, not from military defeat, from geography, from economics, from the refusal of allies to follow a leader who no longer commands the moral authority that makes leadership possible. Okay, now we arrive at today, June 22nd, 2026, Birkenstock, Switzerland. And I want to introduce you to the concept that I think explains everything about what happened in that negotiating room. I'm going to call it the front-loading trap. And I believe that once you see this mechanism clearly, you will never read a diplomatic agreement the same way again. Here's how negotiation sequencing normally works in arms control. The principle is verify, then reward. You demonstrate compliance first. I verify your compliance, then I give you the economic benefits you want. And this is the logic of trust building. You show me yours, then I show you mine. This was precisely the structure of the JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran had to dismantle centrifuges, reduce its uranium enrichment stockpile to an agreed level, allow IAEA inspectors into its facilities, demonstrate verifiable compliance. Then and only then did sanctions get lifted and frozen assets get released. Iran just reversed that logic completely, and the United States agreed to it. Here's what Iran receives from the MOU immediately, meaning today, before any nuclear negotiation begins. Oil and petrochemical export sanctions waived, the maritime blockade lifted, frozen assets held in Qatar released, a major reconstruction and development plan for Iran launched, and while the exact figure is disputed, some reporting puts the committed amount at $300 billion. Iran receives these things now, before any centrifuge has been inspected, before any uranium has been transferred or diluted, before any nuclear agreement has been reached. And what does the United States receive in exchange? A roadmap, a calendar entry, a commitment that 60 days from now, the technical negotiating teams will begin discussing Iran's nuclear program. Now, I want to show you the specific legal mechanism that makes this arrangement essentially irreversible. And this is a part of the deal that I genuinely cannot understand why major news organizations are not discussing. So this is Article 13. Article 13 states that nuclear negotiations, the actual final status, talks about Iran's weapons program, which is the thing America went to war over, will only commence after the United States has implemented Articles 14, 15, 10, and 11. What are those articles? The ceasefire, the lifting of the naval blockade, the sanctions, waivers on oil exports, the release of frozen assets, the non-interference commitment. In other words, Iran embedded the sequencing into the document itself. You cannot even begin discussing the nuclear issue, the reason for this entire conflict, until you have already delivered every single economic concession Iran demanded. The nuclear conversation is legally conditioned on American compliance with Iran's economic demands. Iran gets paid before the work even begins. And there's something else sitting inside this agreement that tells you exactly how complete Iran's preparation was. 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. That is near weapons-grade material. That uranium is currently inside Iran right now. As I am recording this, the IAEA inspectors cannot access it. The agreement says it will be diluted in place under eventual IAEA supervision at a time to be agreed. A time to be agreed after all the economic benefits have already been delivered. From a game theory perspective, what Iran has done is a textbook example of what I call commitment sequencing, combined with first mover advantage. If you control the order in which obligations are fulfilled, you control the entire game. Because whoever acts second can always wait and see whether the first party has fully delivered before reciprocating. Iran controls the order. Iran acts second on the nuclear question. Iran has already received its first mover benefits on the economic question. But this is not an accident. This is not diplomatic clumsiness. This is a strategy that Iran's negotiating team designed with extraordinary precision. Having studied the JCPOA for years, having identified every leverage point that was surrendered in 2015, and having built a new structure that does not repeat those mistakes, okay, now I want to do something that I always push my students to do, because I think it makes for better thinking. I want to steelman the American position. I want to give you the strongest possible argument for why what the United States agreed to in Switzerland might actually be the right call. Because if I only show you one side of this, I'm not doing analysis, I'm doing propaganda. So here is the strongest version of the argument for what America did. One, the United States ended an economically catastrophic situation without a prolonged ground war. Oil at $126 per barrel was not sustainable. Every additional week, the Strait of Hormuz stayed closed, and the global economy was losing hundreds of billions of dollars in trade disruption. Recession was not a risk at that oil price. And with that level of supply disruption, recession was a mathematical certainty. Ending it at whatever cost prevented something worse. 2. The deconfliction cell for Lebanon is a genuine diplomatic innovation. For the first time, there is a direct communication channel between American and Iranian military officials, designed specifically to prevent accidental escalation in a conflict zone where both countries have overlapping interests. That is not nothing. 3. The 60-day roadmap creates accountability. It brings technical experts into the same room. It gives the pragmatic factions inside Iran, and they exist. They are real. They are not powerful enough to control policy, but they exist. It gives them political cover to make concessions, and Iran that is economically recovering has less internal pressure to be a spoiler. That is a steelman, and I want to be honest, it has genuine logic. It is not a stupid argument. A reasonable person can look at this deal and say, given the alternatives, given the economic pressure, given the military exhaustion on 3 fronts, maybe this was the least bad option available. But here's what the steelman cannot account for. Former Assistant Secretary of State David Schenker said it plainly today. The United States demonstrated that it wanted a deal more than Iran did. And when you want a deal more than the other side knows it, they can see it, and they price accordingly. Every concession you give signals desperation. Every concession invites the next demand. Here is the specific problem with the sequencing. On day 61, the morning after the 60-day roadmap expires, Iran will still be selling oil. Iran will still have access to its frozen assets. Iran's economy will be stabilizing, and Iran will still have 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium sitting untouched inside its territory. What leverage does the United States have on day 61? Every card America had, the sanctions, the blockade, the asset freezes, has been played, has been surrendered before a single enrichment centrifuge was discussed. Before a single IAEA inspector stepped foot inside a restricted facility, America gave away its entire hand before seeing Iran's cards. And then there is Article 2, the non-interference clause. Both parties commit to not interfering in each other's internal affairs. This single sentence officially ends any American support for regime change in Iran. Trump famously and repeatedly called on the Iranian people to rise up against their government. Article 2 says, "We have decided as a matter of treaty obligation that we respect the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic at the precise moment when the Iranian government is most economically vulnerable, most politically exposed, most dependent on external revenue. America has guaranteed them sovereignty from external pressure." Former Ambassador Joey Hood described the MOU as reflecting, quote, "quite a fair bit of unwarranted optimism." He noted that neither the Lebanese government nor the Israeli government signed this agreement, yet both are expected to enforce a ceasefire on their respective armed groups as a direct result of it. And the last thing the Steelman cannot account for is the most embarrassing one. While J.D. Vance and his team were working through the night in Switzerland to hold this deal together, President Trump was posting threats on social media. The Iranian delegation walked out of the joint session, not because of anything Iran's hardliners did, but because the American president undermined his own negotiating team in real time on his phone from wherever he was when he decided to post the left hand and the right hand of American foreign policy are not coordinating. And Iran knows this, and they will use this knowledge every single day for the next 60 days. Okay, guys, let me bring this all together. And I want to return one more time to Athens because this is where the comparison becomes most uncomfortable and most important. After the Sicilian expedition destroyed the Athenian fleet, and Athens did not accept what had happened, they could not. The psychological blow was too severe. They kept fighting. They tried to rebuild their navy. They executed their best generals for the failure. The democratic system, which had been Athens' greatest structural advantage, degenerated. Demagogues rose, factions formed, coup attempts happened, and Thucydides writes with what I can only describe as surgical sadness that Athens was not ultimately destroyed by Sparta's military superiority. Athens was destroyed by its refusal to acknowledge its own limitations and by the corruption that refusal produced internally. Now, what is the United States doing right now? In the hours after this agreement, even as the ink is drying on the MOU, Trump is posting that he will hit Iran very hard if they don't comply. Senator Lindsey Graham is on television calling the ceasefire a disaster. Hawks in the Pentagon are circulating plans for Plan B, American seizure of control over the Strait of Hormuz with tolls charged to vessels passing through. Senator Graham has proposed conditioning Saudi Arabia's membership in the Abraham Accords on Saudi Arabia supporting American policy toward Iran. This is not a country that has processed the lesson of epic fury. This is a country that is still inside its 80, still blind, still operating on the assumption that enough threatening language, enough military posture, enough economic pressure will eventually produce Iranian compliance, even though every piece of evidence from the last 4 months indicates the opposite.